So DevBricks, what a launch, man.
Absolutely. It's been really exciting to get it out there this week and get it to the market. Can't wait to get people onto the platform and get them using it, get some feedback as well. We'd love to hear what people would like to see next in the DevBricks product.
Absolutely. Look, one of the wonderful things I think we've set this product up for success with is ability to gather feedback from the community, right? I love the idea that we have a link dedicated to people just providing ideas for new features, for voting on what the next big new feature should be. I think it's really going to drive a lot of, I suppose, customer-focused need and business value, as opposed to, I suppose, we're sitting in the ivory tower trying to make decisions with no feedback at all.
Yeah, we've got a really strong roadmap of features that we think the customer base will want, and we want to hear the feedback so that we can prioritize those features and make sure that we're delivering the best value for money.
I think that's been one of the issues with even just general software development. You look at products evolve based on what people think they need, but not necessarily what they actually need. So it was one of the big things when we introduced DevBricks, but also the documentation and that portal to be able to give that feedback. You know, if we're looking at introducing Jira into the product, we've found that is a pressing thing over the last few days, that a lot of organizations, a lot of our clients are using Jira as well. So although there's a big footprint with Azure DevOps, we need to introduce those other platforms into the system. So, you know, it's been, 3 days? We're on day 4 of the launch, and I think, you know, the feedback we have been receiving from different organizations and different clients is already going into our, you know, based on the conversation we had yesterday, already going into our backlog and evolving. And a lot of it is down to not so much evolving the product's core functionality, but adding in additional capabilities. So as I said, Jira, adding in additional languages and front-end technology as well, which we had every intention and plan to do. I think it's exciting. It's definitely, after so long of working on the product, getting it to where it is, and then ultimately launching it, you know, over the weekend or Monday officially. Yeah, it's been quite exciting.
Yeah, the feedback, particularly through LinkedIn, has been fantastic. Lots of great feedback. Lots of people talking about how game-changing it's going to be for them in their businesses, and even old colleagues reaching out and saying, "Wow, you know, I'm working with Azure DevOps. Let's talk. Let's find out what this product can do, and let's get it into businesses." So really looking forward to having those conversations, getting some webinars going, and helping people to see what the product's capable of, particularly in, you know, our user story health check system. Let's get those user stories really healthy, get that feedback, those acceptance criteria, get our definitions of done really rock solid for our developer team, and then helping to accelerate the developer team as well through our code generation features. And those 2 core features that we've released to market this week will help drive that future adoption with these new features as we grow.
Yeah, you kind of look at organizations, they are the 2 biggest challenges that they have, even our current clients, of I've got a requirement, but is it a clear requirement? And that's ultimately why we've introduced that capability. Obviously there's other reasons to have good code come off the back of it, but you look at any client where they'll define a requirement, if they don't, you know, understand the agile practice of you know, all the ceremonies and a core component of that of having, you know, good clear user stories, it poses challenges for execution on the project, not just from delivery, but, you know, developer picking up that understanding, or a business understanding actually technically what they want. So yeah, quite a powerful piece of functionality in the product, as well as obviously the code generation. I think it's yeah, quite exciting what we've got there, and definitely what we've got to come. It
is exciting, right? Because, and as you know, this is where my background is, right? Product ownership, product management. And I've written about this before. As you said, Brad, one of the biggest challenges you see is when you have an organization, particularly if they're new in the agile space as well, where they'll start throwing down what they think is a user story or they think is a requirement, but it doesn't really, I suppose, fit the mold of what really should be represented in those artifacts from a development team perspective. You're right, it is one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in the industry. Almost everywhere we go, we will see that. There are some really good players, there are others that are not as great at writing them. But ultimately, I think, yeah, the user story feedback and a health checking artifact is just something that I will not be able to live without at the end of the day, because it's just going to be so helpful, and it's going to make writing things so much quicker. Instead of having to write it 10 times, only have to worry about health checking it at the end of the first pass.
I think one of the questions that's come a lot out of, since we've been talking about DevBricks and ultimately launched is, and even from the team at Lynx and the other, sister companies to DevBricks has been around, what does this mean for my role? And it's probably worthwhile, talking about that today, that when we're introducing such a tool that's going to automate elements of development, where does the developer fit in that ecosystem, and what impact does that have to project management or delivery of the project? And we're starting to see it with Lynx as well, with the way we're hiring and the way we're evolving the organisation. And for any partners that are going to watch this, you need to be thinking about the evolution of development and where that will go. With tools like DevBricks that are available, you're reducing the amount of time taken to code a platform, which ultimately means you're changing the way developers will engage with building a solution. So focus on good project managers or good scrum masters, because that's going to be fundamental to ensure that you've got good stories in, hiring good BAs. Times have changed over the years where you'd have BAs and they'd wind back and developers would then be left to their own devices to try and create stories, which is dangerous in its own right. So bringing in good BAs that can articulate a requirement into a user's story, relatively good and well defined, will allow that assessment component to get to the highest rating. Of course, it won't always be perfect, but you need to have that capability. Machine learning consultants. We're talking about all these tools that are popping up on the market, and with regards to ML and AI. And I think moving forward, there'll be a massive push to have more of that consultant or ML consultant capability in the market. There will always be a need for developers. Even with DevBricks, there is still a requirement to have a developer. What that developer looks like has changed. I think they're more senior in nature. They need to understand more around the architecture and what they're adapting or adopting in the organization, especially with the blueprint capability inside of DevBricks. If you don't understand what you're choosing and selecting, you're not going to end up with the best result in the kind of long term. So Lynx is no longer hiring junior developers. We're only hiring mid to senior, and they've had 5-6 years experience being a developer. That way they can work with DevBricks on the execution and delivery of those projects. So it's what's your kind of thing, given you've 20 years in the industry as well? And
yeah, I think spot on. And what I would add is, in terms of those developer roles, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on working with the businesses. Gone are the days of developers behind closed doors hacking away on a keyboard. They're really entwined within the business, and that's going to become even more so with tools like DevBricks and the next movement around AI. Developers are going to be really that conduit between artificial intelligence models and a business, and finding that harmony, bringing all of those different tools and people together to produce software that's meaningful and software that empowers business to do what they do best.
And this is a really good point. The focus on bringing more of those BAs and more of those project management roles, and as you said, embedding the developers into the business as a unit, I think is going to start driving a catalyst in a lot of different industries, because what it means is that you're starting to have more conversations about business value from what you're doing, as opposed to conversations about just how do we do it, how do we do it technically, and then leaving the business value discussions as something that happens at the beginning and then maybe at the end. So I think that's going to be a really big help across, no matter what industry you're in. You're going to be driving more business value overall.
And really goes to the core of agile and continuous improvement, continuous development methodologies, where things change over time. We learn new things about our business and about the software platforms that we're building as we build them. And if we do all of that up front, we lose this entire feedback loop of information and new learnings that we can apply to our projects and to our platforms. Businesses move quickly, and we need to be agile in essence, yeah.
Yeah, and that has been, still is an ongoing issue, and DevBricks won't solve this, is that technology evolves so rapidly. And it's very difficult for consultants to get up to speed and keep up to speed with those things. DevBricks will ultimately help with that, because as we introduce new languages, etc., it will look for those things that have changed. But as I said, it will cause issues in the market with regards to skills and people adapting and evolving around this technology.
What I'd add to that is, from a DevBricks perspective particularly, we had to find a way where we could work with large language models where information isn't necessarily accurate as of this month. We don't have all the information for 2023 in a lot of cases. And we need to provide flexibility so that that information can come from other sources. It's not going to be entwined within the AI models itself. And that was one of the really key parts to the philosophy of DevBricks, is how do we do this in a way where technologies will be fast moving and we can still provide that flexibility to our clients so that they can bring in new technologies or even new versions of their existing technologies and use those within the DevBricks product.
I think that kind of comes down to some of the roadmap, and we're working on it within the product, that whole adaptive learning, and that, given an example of like SAP or one of these bigger organizations releasing new versions, or even Microsoft releasing new versions rapidly of different systems. And as an architect or as a developer or engineer, it's very difficult to keep up to speed. You can't say tomorrow that SAP releases some capability and you can go, oh, I know every capability that's in that release. Like, you don't. You just can't keep on top of it all. So with DevBricks and the neural network and everything that we're doing and building into the system, being able to absorb that new information rapidly, and you as a developer or as an engineer or BA, being able to write a story and have that capability and know about what's changed. So you're relying on the system to tell you what's changed. So as we evolve the product out and we add that capability into the marketplace, where we've done the hard work for you, and all you really need to do is choose what you want in your blueprint, tell it what you actually want to deliver, and it goes and delivers it for you. So some very exciting things coming for it. One of the, I guess, big questions and I've been asked over the last few days is Copilot, DevBricks.
Are they the same thing?
Are they the same thing? And where does it sit, in the ecosystem? And the different clients I've spoken to about that has been, well, Copilot, from Microsoft is, I kind of look at it as the enabler for developers to work with. And you look at, some of the other products that have come out, it's again very focused on the dev, whereas DevBricks is more focused on the business. So I don't see them as a compete. I see them as a capability to work together. So you've got, Copilot working with the developer, where they've got to code a piece of functionality, and it can aid and support that developer. Whereas I see DevBricks more from, I'm a BA, I'm running a requirement, I need this capability delivered, and it, actually delivers it. So they're similar, but they're not, if that makes sense. They're both, I guess, generating code. Well, they're not generating code in a similar way, but they are similar. But yeah, again, Copilot's more for the developer. You agree, Matt? Like it is?
Yeah, I think so. We should see both tools being used in harmony. If we look just purely at the Copilot code development tools in the ecosystem, they're leaving out the fact that a user story might not have enough information for the developer, or that the user story isn't healthy enough and actionable enough, testable, all of those characteristics we look for in a user story. If that user story doesn't represent a really core, well-crafted user story, then products like Copilot are going to produce the wrong sort of code, or code that isn't fit for purpose in terms of what the business really needs. So flipping that on its head, bringing it right back to the start, let's set everything up for success. The only way that tools like Copilot are truly successful is if products like DevBricks can make our user stories more healthy. And that flows through the entire process. So from a DevBricks perspective, we're focusing on the health of our user stories and initial acceleration for the development team. Let's get the skeleton, the framework. Let's get as much of the code written as we possibly can based on the user story, and then let the developers do what they do best. And that's where tools like Copilot can be harmonious within that ecosystem. So we're certainly not seeing it as a compete in any way. It really is that symbiotic relationship as a piece of functionality transitions through the entire business. Yep. And we're using the right tool at the right time to achieve the results.
And I think it's a different perspective for us as a group of companies, because we've got obviously Links, that's the software development business. We've got our recruitment capability as well, but then we've got our product companies, DevBricks, kind of being one of them. So, as from a Links perspective, I look at DevBricks and what it brings to us as a software development company, being able to better refine the program of work that we're delivering for a client, the requirements, the time to market being one of the big things. A traditional project of a year might take half that time when we introduce the front end and have the back end capability. And again, it's more of an onus on delivery from a BA perspective, and good leads, and obviously good PMO as well. So it's changing it, but we'd still use Copilot. So it's very much, we're a Microsoft partner. So at the end of the day, we're going to stick with the Microsoft ecosystem. It's exactly why we released Azure DevOps first.
Exactly.
Because we are a Microsoft partner. But yeah, I see it as a supplement. Definitely you'd use both in conjunction. And it's the same with JetBrains and some of these other tools that have come out. They're again still focused on the developer, whereas we're more focused on that top end. But they do go well together. So, any other questions you guys have been, or I guess people have thrown to you around DevBricks?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is, when can we see it?
Yep. Yeah, that's been one that's been thrown our way quite a bit actually over the last few days. And you can sign up, it's not hard, just sign up.
Absolutely, you go straight to the DevBricks.ai website and click that register button. We'd love to find out how you might use it in your organization. And similar to what we've been talking about today, if Azure DevOps isn't the project management tool and DevOps tool that you're using, and it's Jira or maybe another product as well, let's hear about that through our feedback system. We'd love to be able to talk to you about those things.
One of the other things I've been looking at as well, some of the things being asked, is where are we going with it now? I mean, obviously we've discussed the feedback aspect, but what's our roadmap moving forwards?
One of the things I'm really keen to see is within that user story health check system is starting to help the BA team, the PMO team, to enhance those user stories in a more collaborative way. So working with the artificial intelligence models to have conversations, essentially. Have the model ask us questions, because we don't know what we don't know. And there's a lot of information sitting in those models we can use to drive those conversations. So I'm really keen to see a feedback loop where we can converse with those models. It asks us questions and we feed that automatically back into our user stories. So essentially it's like having that conversation with the business and at the same time with a technical lead and technical architecture team all at once, so that we can build a really well-refined user story.
Excellent. And then the other one that I've had come up a little bit recently as well is we often talk about the code generation aspect of DevBricks and the user story refinement aspect. What we don't normally address directly is what can I do for testing?
So within the DevBricks product, we've really covered the entire ecosystem for what a developer should output as part of a user story. So we're not just focusing on the initial implementation, we're also focusing on taking that implementation and generating unit tests. And that then extends through to things like integration tests as well as performance tests. So within the blueprint system, we can really define each of these different outputs. And these are outputs that a developer would be commonly achieving within their project.
It's expected to deliver.
Yes.
Reality of how often it gets delivered.
And that's the thing, right? I think it's a lot more, it's easier once you've made a start on these things. And if a artificial intelligence model has given you that start, there's files now that are unit test files. There are files for the implementation. It's all structured into the folders where you would expect them to be. And it adapts. So once you have parts of your solution built, the models are aware of that. They understand the folder structures. It will fit new files alongside the existing folder structures as well. It's working alongside the development team, not just off doing its own thing. And over time, that's only going to grow as we introduce features to accommodate existing code scanning and analysis. And so it really comes to the developers are getting an acceleration there, but because it's already started, it's much easier for them to work within that framework to achieve their user stories.
I think that's probably one of the biggest, if we're talking about capability being introduced to the product with these natural language models, and what we plan to do with DevBricks of introducing the code or their client's pre-existing code base. think about a developer onboarding into a system. They have to learn the way that model is working, the way that the system's been architected. DevBricks will learn that straight away. So by us ingesting your code base into the system, which we do for front-end, back-end development, because in order to build something on the front, you need to know about the API on the back end. And it kind of comes back to the conversation before around introducing things like SAP or another provider that's out there. You have to learn what the API can do. DevBricks can learn that once. You don't need to teach a whole team about it, you learn it once. So as we introduce those additional, I guess, capabilities into the marketplace, it will change the way that development's done even further on top of where DevBricks is today. So there's some exciting features that we're working on around that where it will ultimately give you the ability to do the front end. It'll learn based on your model or your data into the model and accelerate development even further. So there's a lot of things that are exciting there, but I guess overall, looking at the business, our mission is to enable anyone to build software. At the moment, we're focusing on that BA and I guess the top end, the requirements of the application. But with these natural language models being able to have a conversation of, I want to build a marketplace, and I like the look and feel of these 3 companies. You can't use that, but I like the feel of it. And here's my style guide. And here's a mock-up that I've put together that might be in Figma or another tool that we will integrate into DevBricks. And you're basically then having that conversation. It's building an understanding of what you want, but we're not restricting it to a developer or an engineer or a BA or a PM to be defining that. We're actually giving you the ability to talk to it. So it will, that's a very long path away. But that's our our long-term goal, and there's a lot of building blocks that we're required to get there. But I think the problem with, and not just in Australia, this is a global issue. How many people, mum and dad, sit down the road and go, I'd love to be able to do this. They don't have the cash, they don't have the know-how. And it's a challenge. Like how much innovation's been left on the table, day in, day out, it'd be enormous globally. So with DevBricks, not now, but the future, being able to bridge that gap and being able to say, well, you want an application, no problem. You don't need to have $10 million or $1 million or whatever it may be to build the application now. We could give you a PM to manage it and make sure that things are being controlled, a BA, and you don't have to worry about the core dev. You'd have an architect and that's it. And you use DevBricks to ultimately build the platform. So that is our goal long term, I'd say, is to enable innovation, but in a very different way that happens today.
And I think one of the questions that comes out of that is, isn't that what no code came to be? Where does no code fit into this? And why doesn't no code work in these sorts of situations? And I think for me, there's so much more than writing the code. And that's really what we're talking about. There's the content, the marketing materials. How does all of that get built? Once the product is up and running, how do you scale it? There's all of these different considerations operationally, as well as making a product approachable comes from much more than just a developer sitting hacking away on a keyboard. And while the no-code movement fits well into certain business operations, different workflows within a business, it's very difficult to use it to build a fully fledged product that can scale in a way that an inexperienced or non-developer person might use. And
well, you look at, I'd say DevBricks is the new version of no code. It is generating code, but in a flexible way. So you can still define a requirement and have your code generated. Obviously with no code or low code platforms, the challenge is you're limited by the product you choose. So you look at I won't say the organization that we did it for or the product they use, but I'm sure one big telco bought them. I'll leave it at that. And products like that organizations are moving away from because they grab the product, they go low code or no code, and they'll run it for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll get to the point they go, oh, we want to evolve this, that, and the other, and we can't do it with a platform. Whereas with DevBricks, all tools like this, even Copilot, where you're building a platform, you're building it with code. So you have the flexibility to modify it, you have the flexibility to change it, but you're not worrying about the actual raw code itself. So it's changing the way that I'd say delivery is actually happening, and that new evolution using NLM and being able to have these big neural networks to learn off that means that we're getting it to a point where, well, you don't have the low code anymore or no code. You have code, but it's highly tolerable. So it's very, very different.
So I think there's also another hidden advantage in here as well. We talk about this in low code, no code applications. They tend to follow best practices, at least somewhat, follow best practices within the industries. One of the big questions I see coming up more and more often, particularly with a lot of our professional services engagements, is, can you help us review our platform? Can you help us get to a point where we are following best practice, whether that's from code storage, whether that's from data security, whatever it might be. It's always help us get to best practice. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Exactly how can DevBricks help achieve that?
I'd say it's twofold. I'll hand over to you a second, Matt, to talk more about the tech, but I think I look at some of the projects that obviously I'm sure you're going down the path of one you'll be working on recently. Part of the blueprint is to define that structure on creation of a project. So even if we've got pre-existing code and say we've got that capability launched now, obviously we don't, but we will be. When you're defining a new project, obviously in the system now, that blueprint technology is key and instrumental. But I look at pre-existing clients. It's back to your point, Matt, of what if you've got this architecture there and it's there, it's already been created. That whole ingestion of that data that you have or code that you have into our environment will enable us to do those assessments. To be able to say, well, these are the standards that we're chasing, whether it be security, whether it be code standards, or even performance-related things. So being able to, introduce DevBricks, have a look at your code, and it pop up and say, here's 20 things that have not been done in line with whatever standard you've actually set. If you said you want to have PCI compliance and you built it internally, well, what are those compliances you need to meet? You dump that in. Or in the new world, you say marketplace PCI compliant, and it automatically does that for you. And then off the back of that, you've got, well, here's 20 recommendations or things you need to implement, and it tells you what to implement, or even does the implementation for you. So I think my view is definitely around that capability of being able to bring it in and ingest that code, which is just one thing that we've got on the roadmap at the moment.
Absolutely. And that ingestion of code goes along with then ingestion of the supporting material. So when we talk about these best practices, what are they? And where do we find the reputable source for that information? And so it really comes down to ingestion beyond just the lines of code, to looking at the underlying technologies, packages. There's lots of third-party libraries used these days around open source. We need to be able to pull all of that information, manipulate it, analyze it in a way that we can then formulate those best practices in a way that the machines can start to understand. And then they can go ahead and apply those to your code bases. So when we talk about things like scalability and performance, we will need ways of having the code run and have the models then analyze the performance of certain hot paths through the system. For example, we want to make the parts that are core to a business really fast. Everyone's using those features within the business. If they go down, it causes significant business impact. We need ways that there's a feedback loop with the AI models to be able to receive that information, get the intelligence around how fast that particular hot path is, and then it can make improvements based on that. So going forward, we have a number of different facets that we'll be achieving there, both the data ingestion, the analysis. But one of the key things we have to look at is when the code executes in this performance test environment, where does that happen in a secure way so that our businesses, our customers can be confident that their IP isn't leaking into the cloud? Because that's going to be one of the key aspects here, is maintaining data privacy and control over IP, but still allowing these models to run potentially in the cloud and be able to provide that type of feedback. So it's a lot of things on the roadmap to achieve those.
I think that's one of the key things that we haven't been asked it specifically yet, but we obviously with the metrics we've been tracking, we've noticed people go into the privacy policy, and I think that's one key thing, and probably worth talking today is around how we architected the system from a security perspective to maintain, obviously segmentation between clients. But, when we talk about ingesting someone's code base into our platform, even self goes, ooh, and how do you protect that? And we've done a lot of work on making sure that we are protecting, clients' data and clients' intellectual property, that basically everyone's segmented. It's truly multi-tenanted. We're segmenting the data, we're controlling that data. At no stage do we own any of it. No stage do we analyze any of it ourselves. There's no human analyzing the data. We're not using your data to train our models or anything like that.
You're not going to have your code suddenly spit out into another customer's code base. Yeah,
it's controlled and segmented. So I think to even take that the next step further, we're also looking at introducing it where you can deploy it in your own environment. So at the moment, it's delivered as a software as a service. And we will move it to a platform as a service. So you'll be able to deploy it through an ARM template within Azure, and then basically consume, our pretty much DevBricks as a service in your Azure subscription, Amazon subscription, Google subscription, whatever other provider you choose to use. So it actually changes it that you have full control over it. So we are looking to do that as an item on the backlog or the roadmap. To give you full control of the environment. So we know privacy is a concern. Yep. Now will continue to be. So everything we've done is with that in mind. Is to keep it secure. So do you want to add anything on, without disclosing our architecture, and actually how we're doing it?
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing. So in terms of the architecture, we're keeping all of your code inside your existing code repositories. And when DevBricks needs to access that information, it's done through your existing code repositories in a way that only when a user requests access through the health check system or to generate code, do we gain any access to that code. And it's very constrained in terms of we're only getting access to the code that you've approved. So we have a project onboarding system. Businesses need to opt in to the projects that they're comfortable with, and that grows over time as they onboard their projects. But again, it stays within their organization. Their IP stays secure, and DevBricks only accesses it based on them saying it's okay to do so.
I think the only other thing I kind of had running in my back of my mind here as well is when any kind of project lead or a business representative, right, they think, all right, I need to start doing some coding. Obviously, they're thinking application coding. Okay, that's the go-to immediate mindset. What are we doing in the space of actual architecture? Less so much from the actual, I guess, development of technical architecture, but more from the space of how we can use DevBricks to help us write our architecture management scripts, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think about some of the interactions I've had with the inexperienced developers within the team. We talk about this idea of foundational knowledge. It's essentially we build up to a certain level of knowledge around computer systems, how they work well, how they work efficiently. And it's interesting watching the interactions with inexperienced developers when you put a question to them, the amount of foundational knowledge they need to go and gather to be able to answer that question effectively. So it's interesting to see how much foundational knowledge an inexperienced developer needs to be able to answer those sorts of questions effectively. You flip that on its head and you look at the large language models, you look at the AI models, neural networks, they already have that foundational knowledge. So putting individual technologies aside, they understand how computer systems work. They understand how businesses work. And what I'm finding in these interactions is a lot of the time when you ask the question to the AI with the exact same question that you pose to a person, the AI far achieves beyond the inexperienced developer in terms of answering these sorts of fundamental questions. So when we take that and apply it to architecture, we're essentially saying that we have this wealth of foundational knowledge that can then be generalized into specific business areas. And the models are very good at applying that information and achieving these types of architecture considerations. What it means is it can ask questions back to people, questions that as an inexperienced developer, they wouldn't know to ask. But the models can prompt the people, the human person to ask those questions and find out from the business what the answers to those questions are. And that's where that feedback loop really starts to come into it. We're now driving architecture of business solutions through an AI model, asking questions, getting that answer and the feedback loop, and rinse and repeat essentially to build up a solution architecture before technical or experienced team members need to get involved.
It's exactly the capability that's built in DevBricks, which is the user story analysis component, which is ultimately why we built that. Yeah, to be able to have that, well, one, to produce good quality code or good structured code, but a better story means better output. So it's was the core component, obviously, in the system, and of course we're generating code as well, which is the cool part. But I think without that feature, you could generate any form of code, and we'd just be in the same situation we are now with, I guess, building solutions of client says I need X, or they define whatever user story is their expectation. You go through your sprint, you build your code, you go to the end, you do a demo, and they go, that kind of wasn't what we want.
Yeah.
So being able to better refine it, I think, up front means that we're asking the right questions back eventually. Obviously with some of the improvement we're adding in even the user story analysis side, but being able to refine it even further, and instead of getting a great user story, getting an excellent user story, which means you get excellent code that's structured and deliverable exactly as to what you want, rather than the guessing games that happen along the way.